Welcome to my straw bale experiment. So for all the years of gardening, I've always heard of this concept of straw bale gardening. I've never tried it. I was very dubious about whether it would actually work for me, but I had some extra straw bales this year and some extra space, and I decided I'm gonna give it a shot. So I did not do this the correct way. I didn't follow the proper instructions for conditioning bales and doing everything by the book. There are a lot of good tutorials out there if you're starting with brand new fresh straw bales. What I did was kind of the lazy way of straw bale gardening. So I had a bunch of straw from the end of last summer that I was using to insulate the base of my greenhouse. So as you can imagine, those straw bales sat out exposed to the elements the entire winter. So since they had been weathered quite a bit already and were starting to break down, I did not have to go through the whole conditioning process. What I did was actually take some high nitrogen fertilizer that I had. I think it was just some Gardens Alive, Lawns Alive fertilizer. And I just sprinkled that on top of all of the bales. Watered that in, did that maybe a handful of times, sprinkled a little more fertilizer, watered it in over the course of maybe, 2 weeks or so. And that was it. They were pretty much ready to plant at that point. Now another thing we did was to add this cowl panel trellis behind the straw bales. And this works both to kind of hold the straw bales in place and to provide a trellis for any of my tomatoes or my pole beans or any of those vining crops that may need a little extra support. Now I tried several different crops, and I did both from seed and from transplant because I wanted to see what worked really well in this style of growing. So I think one of the big successes has been the peppers. Now I've got a shishito and an orange bell, I'll show you in a second here, but these have done as well as anything in my garden. Now I started these from transplant, put the transplants directly into the bales, and I also gave them 2 supplemental feedings with a food specifically for peppers after planting. So once at transplant and once about the time they were starting to set fruit. Now I also did tomatoes as transplants. I did 2 different varieties in here. And I feel like the tomatoes struggled a little bit. Now this was a very bad year for me for disease, so that did not help. But I just feel like the tomatoes in the straw bales did not attain the flavor that I'm used to from an in-ground tomato. Tomatoes are definitely doable, but I think they're gonna require a little more attention to fertilization from my end. Beans have been really, really happy in the straw bales. So I did this one, which is willow leaf butter bean, kind of like a lima bean for those of you who aren't familiar with butter beans. And I did 2 flat potted Roma type pole beans, and they've all done really well. I started them from seed in the bales. I overcrowded them a bit. I think in future I'll do proper spacing with them, but planted from seed, gave them a just all-purpose vegetable fertilizer when they were about a foot or so tall. And other than that, they've been left to their own devices, and they've just been really, really happy. So I think pole beans I will be doing again in the straw bales. The only other crop I did was potatoes. And unfortunately, these were planted pretty late, and we did get pretty hot. And these guys have just kind of sat out here. Now the foliage is just now starting to die down, so I'm about ready to pull these out. But I'm not sure how these are gonna do. I'll just pull this plant out of here now and see. So, a couple little tubers. Anything else in there? Nope, that'd be about it. So I know I've seen where other people have had pretty good success growing their potatoes in straw bales. I think my method needs a little bit of tweaking. I need to get these in a little earlier. But to be honest, I probably will not be doing these in straw bales again. So that's it. That's the whole harvest from my straw bales. But if you had no other alternative and you really wanted potatoes, you can get a few potatoes from the straw bales. And I'm sure I would have gotten a few more had I done everything correct with these. So as I mentioned, I pulled a tomato out of here, and I'm actually going to start putting some fall crops in as the summer crops come out. I'm doing some cabbage. Excuse the sad little seedlings here. The cabbage worms have gotten to them already. But basically when I planted, I just used my hand hoe, made a little divot in the straw, put my seedling transplant in, give it a little dose of food, and then firm that straw around the base. So I'm doing 3 cabbages in here. With my peppers, I did 2 plants per bale, and my tomatoes, I did 1 plant per bale. And that seemed to be pretty good spacing. We'll see how these cabbages work out. That might be a little tight. I might be better with 2, but this is an experiment, so. And my final step is just to water. Water, water, water. Always watering. And you definitely want to be more diligent about the watering as these guys are getting established, just like you would with your in-ground garden. And with my seed, as I mentioned, the first time I did them a little too tight. You should really just space them as per the seed packet or how you would normally space them in the garden. But just, again, come along, kind of loosen a spot in that straw bale, poke that seed down in there. And then I like to just kind of bring some straw down over the top to cover and kind of firm them down in there. And again, water. And I'm still kind of amazed by this because to my mind, it just does not seem like this should work, but they grow. Now I will say the straw bale garden has been really easy as far as maintenance. No weeds, it's easy to pick. The one thing to keep in mind is that it does require watering. I was a little worried about how often I was going to have to be watering, but I'm finding that it's no more frequently than my stuff that I'm growing in regular containers. So when it's really, really hot and dry, that's about once every other day. Earlier in the year when we were getting rain, I was maybe having to water once a week, but it's just like in-ground growing where if you stick your fingers a couple inches down to the bale and it's dry, you gotta water. So I was watering by hand. The easiest thing that I can figure if you're gonna do this is either situate it very, very close to your garden hose or get some of that irrigation line. Just stick a few stakes in your bales and be able to turn the whole thing on and water it all at once. That would make this system just about as low maintenance as you could possibly get. Now, obviously, I have a lot of room for in-ground traditional growing. I don't need to do a straw bale garden. I will probably continue to do this as I have the bales available, just because it is a very easy way to grow. This was great for this particular area because this is very low and wet and I have trouble doing in-ground right here. And also as the straw decomposes, I can add this to the compost pile. It rots, it's a great source of organic matter. So this straw will be used continually in a cycle to contribute to my overall garden health. And I would love to hear from you. Have you done a straw bale garden before? How has it worked? Are there things that you would do differently or tips that you can suggest? Or will you plan to do a straw bale garden in the future? Drop a line in the comments below and let me know. And if you find content like this helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.